The worst mistake of my life wasn't marrying Ethan Blackwood. It was believing I could ever leave him. The church bells echoed through the cathedral like a countdown I couldn't stop. Each chime seemed to vibrate through my ribs, reminding me that with every passing second, my old life was slipping farther away. I stood at the end of the aisle gripping a bouquet of white roses so tightly that my fingers ached beneath the satin gloves. The flowers smelled sweet, almost painfully sweet, like they were trying too hard to convince me this was a happy day. Around me, hundreds of candles flickered against towering stone walls. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, scattering warm golden light across polished marble floors. Everything looked beautiful, expensive, perfect. None of it felt real. My wedding dress weighed nearly 20 pounds. Layers of ivory fabric trailed behind me like chains disguised as silk. Somewhere near the front row, reporters and photographers waited outside the private guest list, desperate for a glimpse of the most talked about wedding in Manhattan. Ethan Blackwood, 36 years old, billionaire CEO, the man whose face appeared on magazine covers and business networks every week. The man people described as brilliant, ruthless, and impossible to read. And somehow, in less than 3 months, he had become my husband. Or at least he would in the next few minutes. Claire. My father's voice trembled beside me. You don't have to do this. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they felt cruel. Because we both knew they weren't true. 6 months earlier, Bennett Construction had collapsed under debts nobody saw coming. My father had spent 30 years building that company. One economic disaster after another had reduced it to paperwork, lawsuits, and overdue notices. Then Ethan Blackwood appeared. Not as a savior. Not exactly. More like a solution wrapped in a contract no one could afford to refuse. I swallowed hard and forced a smile that felt borrowed. It's okay, Dad. It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. But pretending felt easier than falling apart. The music began. Soft strings floated through the cathedral. Every guest rose to their feet. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the first steps I took down the aisle. Then I saw him. Ethan stood beneath the massive stained glass window behind the altar. Black tuxedo, broad shoulders, calm posture. He looked completely unaffected by the fact that hundreds of eyes were watching him. While my stomach twisted itself into knots, he appeared as steady as stone. 12 years older than me. 12 years more powerful. 12 years of experiences I couldn't even imagine. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His blue eyes remained fixed on me as I approached. Not warm. Not cold. Just focused. Like he was studying something important. Something he intended to keep. The closer I got, the harder it became to breathe. I told myself it was nerves. Anyone would be nervous. But deep down I knew it was something else. Ethan Blackwood had a reputation that followed him everywhere. Competitors feared him. Investors respected him. Employees obeyed him. Nobody ever seemed to leave his world unchanged. I stopped beside him. The minister began speaking. Words drifted around me without meaning. Commitment. Partnership. Marriage. Forever. Forever sounded much longer than it had yesterday. Finally the minister smiled. Do you, Ethan Blackwood, take Claire Bennett to be your lawful wife? Ethan never looked away from me. Ido. His voice was calm, certain, immediate. No hesitación. The minister turned toward me. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn around, to choose uncertainty over this impossible future. But then I saw my father's face. The exhaustion, the hope, the relief. I closed my eyes for half a second. Ido. The words barely left my lips before applause filled the cathedral. Just like that, it was done. The minister announced us husband and wife. Cameras flashed somewhere in the distance. Guests smiled. Champagne waited at the reception. The world celebrated. But as Ethan reached for my hand, his fingers closing gently around mine, he leaned close enough that only I could hear him. Relax, Claire. His voice was low and steady. You look like you're preparing for a prison sentence. My breath caught. Maybe I am. For the first time all day, something almost resembling amusement appeared in his eyes. Not a smile. Not quite. Just a brief crack in the perfect mask. Then he straightened and guided me toward the exit as applause thundered around us. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that tiny glimpse behind his cold exterior scared me far more than the mask itself. The reception felt like a movie I had somehow wandered into by accident. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath enormous chandeliers. A jazz band played softly from a raised platform overlooking the ballroom. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne and elegant appetizers I could not even name. Everywhere I looked, there were people with perfect smiles and expensive clothes. Politicians, investors, celebrities, the kind of people I had only seen on television. And somehow I was expected to belong among them. I stood near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, watching thousands of lights stretch across the city like stars scattered across black velvet. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. White dress, diamond earrings, wedding ring. None of it felt like mine. Mrs. Blackwood. I nearly jumped. Ethan had appeared beside me without making a sound. His tuxedo jacket was gone now, revealing a crisp white shirt rolled neatly at the sleeves. You seem determined to spend your wedding reception alone. I forced a small smile. I am just trying to catch my breath. His eyes studied me for a moment. From the guests or from me? The question landed harder than it should have. Before I could answer, a gray-haired man approached us with a broad smile. Ethan, congratulations. The man shook Ethan's hand enthusiastically before turning toward me. And this must be Claire. I have heard a great deal about you. I almost laughed. Nobody had heard anything about me 3 months ago. I was a graduate student working part-time at a bookstore. Yet throughout the evening, person after person greeted me as though I had suddenly become important simply because I stood beside Ethan. The realization was unsettling. Not one of them seemed interested in who I actually was. They only cared about the name attached to mine now. Hours passed in a blur of introductions, speeches, and photographs. Eventually I escaped to a quiet hallway outside the ballroom. The silence felt like a gift. I kicked off my heels and leaned against the cool marble wall. My feet hurt. My head hurt. Everything hurt. There you are. I looked up to find my father approaching. For the first time all day, his shoulders looked lighter. The constant worry that had haunted him for months seemed gone. You okay? He asked softly. I nodded even though it was not entirely true. Are you? His eyes drifted toward the ballroom entrance. The company is safe. The employees are safe. Whatever happens next, Claire, I will spend the rest of my life being grateful to you. My chest tightened. That was the problem. Everyone kept thanking me as if I had made some noble sacrifice. The truth was more complicated. I was not sure whether I had saved my family or trapped myself. A few minutes later, a black town car waited outside the hotel entrance. The night air carried the scent of rain even though the streets remained dry. Ethan opened the rear door and gestured for me to enter. Where are we going? I asked. Home. One simple word. Yet something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. The car pulled away from the hotel and headed downtown. 20 minutes later, Manhattan's skyline towered around us. Then we stopped in front of a gleaming glass skyscraper that seemed to disappear into the clouds. I stared upward through the window. You live here. We live here, Ethan corrected calmly. The elevator climbed more than 80 floors without stopping. My ears popped from the height. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a penthouse so vast it felt unreal. Glass walls revealed breathtaking views of the city in every direction. White marble floors reflected soft golden lighting. Everything was elegant, perfect, untouched. Yet despite its beauty, the place felt strangely empty. Quiet, like nobody truly lived here. Ethan loosened his tie and set his keys on a nearby table. Then he turned toward me. Welcome home, Claire. I looked around the enormous penthouse and felt a chill I could not explain. Because for the first time that day, it occurred to me that the wedding was over. And now I was completely alone with Ethan Blackwood. I stood in the center of the penthouse long after Ethan disappeared down a hallway lined with modern artwork and floor-to-ceiling glass. The silence pressed against me from every direction. Back in my old apartment there had always been noise. Traffic outside. Neighbors arguing through thin walls. The hum of an old refrigerator that sounded like it was fighting for its life. Here there was nothing. Just quiet. Expensive, perfect quiet. I slowly walked across the marble floor, my heels clicking softly with every step. The city stretched beneath me through the glass walls. Thousands of lights glittered across Manhattan. From 80 stories up, the streets looked unreal, like a model city someone had carefully arranged beneath the stars. A few minutes later, a woman in a navy suit appeared from another hallway. She looked to be in her 50s, composed and professional. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said politely. "My name is Margaret. I manage the household." Household. The word caught me off guard. Ethan apparently lived in a world where people managed households. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to show you your rooms." Rooms. Plural. I followed her down a long corridor. The penthouse seemed endless. We passed a private gym, a library larger than my college campus reading room, and a dining area with a table that could seat 20 people. Finally, Margaret opened a door. "This is your suite." I stepped inside and nearly forgot how to breathe. The bedroom alone was larger than my entire apartment. Soft cream-colored walls. A king-sized bed. Fresh flowers on a nearby table. Beyond another doorway waited a walk-in closet filled with clothing that still had designer tags attached. "I think there has been a mistake," I said quietly. Margaret offered a small smile. "No mistake, Mrs. Blackwood." After she left, I wandered through the room in disbelief. Dresses, shoes, jewelry, everything arranged perfectly. Someone had somehow guessed my size. The realization made me uncomfortable. It felt less like a gift and more like preparation. As if this life had been waiting for me before I ever agreed to it. An hour later, I changed into a simple sweater and stepped into the hallway. I needed water. Or air. Or maybe proof that this place was real. The penthouse remained silent. Eventually I found the kitchen. Stainless steel appliances gleamed beneath soft lighting. I opened the refrigerator and froze. It was fully stocked with foods I actually liked. The same yogurt brand I bought every week. My favorite sparkling water. Even the coffee creamer I always used. A chill crawled up my spine. I had never told Ethan any of those things. "You look concerned." His voice came from behind me. I nearly dropped the water bottle in my hand. Ethan stood near the doorway, jacket removed, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. Somehow he still looked perfectly composed while I felt completely unbalanced. "How do you know what coffee creamer I use?" I asked. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "That is what concerns you. It is a reasonable question. I prefer being prepared." His answer did not answer anything. I crossed my arms. Prepared for what? For the first time, his expression became difficult to read. Not cold. Not amused. Something else. For my wife moving into my home. The word wife still felt strange. Too heavy.
Tout permanent.
I looked away toward the city lights. This does not feel like my home. The silence that followed stretched several seconds. Then Ethan walked closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just steady. Certain. "I know." I glanced up at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "Then why does it feel like you planned every detail?" His blue eyes held mine. "Because I did." My heartbeat stumbled. "Why?" He looked out across the city before answering. "Because when I commit to something, Claire, I do not do it halfway." The words should have reassured me. Instead they left me standing there with a strange feeling in my chest. Because for the first time since meeting Ethan Blackwood, I realized something important. He was not trying to impress me. He was not trying to convince me. In his mind, this marriage was already settled. Completely. Permanently. And that realization was far more unsettling than anything else in the penthouse. The next morning, I woke up disoriented. For a few seconds I could not remember where I was. Then sunlight spilled across the marble floors, the skyline stretched beyond the glass walls, and reality settled heavily onto my chest. I was in Ethan Blackwood's penthouse. I was married. And somehow none of it felt any more real than it had yesterday. The day passed strangely. Margaret showed me around the building. Staff members greeted me politely. Drivers stood ready whenever transportation was needed. Every detail of life inside Ethan's world seemed organized with military precision. Yet the one person I rarely saw was Ethan himself. He left before 8 in the morning and spent the day inside meetings, conference calls, and negotiations that apparently moved millions of dollars with a few signatures. By evening, I found myself wandering the penthouse alone again. The silence returned. The same silence that made the place feel less like a home and more like a museum. That was when I noticed the door. It sat at the end of a hallway I had not explored before. Unlike every other door in the penthouse, this one was different. Dark wood. No decorations. No visible handle from a distance. Something about it immediately caught my attention. Maybe it was because every other room had been shown to me. Or maybe it was because nobody had mentioned this one. Curiosity pulled me forward. I reached the door just as footsteps approached behind me. That room stays closed. I turned sharply. Ethan stood several feet away. His suit jacket draped over one arm. He looked tired for the first time since I had met him. Not weak. Just exhausted. Human. What is in there? I asked. His expression immediately hardened. Nothing that concerns you. That is not really an answer. It is the only one you are getting. The tension between us thickened. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Ethan stepped closer. 3 rules, Claire. His voice remained calm. Too calm. Rule 1. Do not leave the city without telling me. I blinked. Leave the city? Rule 2. If you ever need something, call me before anyone else. The seriousness in his tone made my stomach tighten. And Rule 3. His eyes shifted briefly toward the closed door. You do not enter that room. The answer came instantly. No hesitation. No explanation. Just certainty. That alone guaranteed I would think about the room constantly. Ethan must have realized it because a faint frustration crossed his face. I am serious. Why? Because I am asking you not to. Before I could argue further, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and frowned. I have to take this. Then he disappeared into his office, leaving me alone in the hallway. I stared at the closed door for several long seconds. My rational side told me to walk away. Every person deserves privacy. Every person deserves secrets. But another voice whispered that secrets were exactly what had brought me here in the first place. Ethan knew everything about me. My favorite coffee creamer. My clothing size. My daily routine. Yet I knew almost nothing about him. Hours later, long after midnight, the penthouse had gone silent. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Eventually I slipped out of bed and wandered into the hallway. The city lights glowed softly beyond the glass walls. Everything felt still. Then I found myself standing in front of the door again. My pulse quickened. I should have gone back to bed. Instead, I reached for the handle. To my surprise, it was not locked. My breath caught. For several seconds I hesitated. Then curiosity won. Slowly, quietly, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of old books and fresh lilies. That was the first thing I noticed. Not danger. Not secrets. Just an unexpected sense of stillness. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting pale silver shadows across the floor. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, this room felt personal. Lived in. Human. My eyes moved slowly across the space. Shelves lined one wall, filled with novels, journals, and framed photographs. A small piano sat near the window. A cream-colored armchair rested beside a reading lamp. Nothing about it matched the cold precision that defined the rest of Ethan's world. Then I saw the photographs. My breath caught. I stepped closer. Every frame held the image of the same young woman. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Warm smile. She looked to be around my age. 24. Maybe 25. There were pictures of her laughing on a beach. Reading on a balcony. Standing beside Ethan at charity events. In every photograph, Ethan looked different. Younger. Softer somehow. Less guarded. My stomach tightened. I did not need anyone to tell me who she was. The answer was obvious. She mattered. A lot. I reached toward a silver frame sitting alone on a nearby table. The photograph showed Ethan standing beside her beneath a canopy of white flowers. They were dressed formally. Smiling. Happy. It looked very much like a wedding picture. Suddenly the room felt colder. I lowered the frame carefully and noticed something partially hidden beneath it. A folded newspaper clipping. Curiosity got the better of me. Picked it up. The headline mentioned a charity foundation. The article described a tragic accident involving a young woman named Victoria Hale. The accompanying photograph showed the same woman from the frames. My pulse quickened. Victoria. The name echoed inside my head. I scanned the article. The details were limited, but one sentence stood out. Victoria Hale, fiancée of technology executive Ethan Blackwood. Fiancée, not wife. I frowned. That made no sense. The photograph suggested something much deeper than an engagement announcement. Why would Ethan keep an entire room dedicated to someone he had supposedly never married? A floorboard creaked behind me. I froze. Slowly I turned around. Ethan stood in the doorway. He was completely motionless. His expression unreadable. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. The silence felt endless. Then his eyes moved to the newspaper clipping in my hands. Something changed in his face. Not anger. Not exactly. More like disappointment. Deep disappointment. I told you not to come in here. His voice was quiet. Somehow that made it worse. I carefully set the clipping back on the table. Who was she? Ethan did not answer immediately. He stepped into the room and looked around as if seeing it for the first time in years. Moonlight reflected in his blue eyes. Her name was Victoria. The softness in his voice surprised me. It was the gentlest I had ever heard him sound. You loved her. Another silence followed. Then he nodded once. Yes. My chest tightened unexpectedly. I should not have cared. I barely knew this man. Yet standing inside that room, surrounded by memories he clearly could not let go of, I felt something I had not expected. Sadness. Not for myself. For him. Ethan looked toward one particular photograph near the piano. This room stays exactly as it was. His gaze remained fixed on the frame. Nothing gets moved. Nothing changes. Suddenly I understood. The room was not a secret because it contained danger. It was a secret because it contained grief. And for the first time since entering Ethan Blackwood's world, I saw a crack in the armor he wore so carefully. But as I glanced back toward the newspaper clipping, another question surfaced. If Victoria had only been his fiancée, why did this room feel like a shrine to a wife he never stopped mourning? The next morning, I could not stop thinking about Victoria. Her photographs lingered in my mind while sunlight poured through the penthouse windows and painted golden reflections across the marble floors. I sat at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee growing cold between my hands, replaying every detail from the night before. The smile in the pictures. The preserved room. The sadness in Ethan's voice when he spoke her name. None of it fit the image of the controlled, untouchable man the world seemed to know. You are staring at that coffee like it insulted you. I looked up. Ethan had entered the kitchen sometime during my thoughts. He loosened the knot of his tie as he walked toward the espresso machine. His expression was calm, but there were shadows beneath his eyes. I wondered if he had slept at all. I was thinking, I admitted. That can be dangerous. About Victoria. The room instantly grew quieter. Ethan's hand paused on the countertop. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. For a moment I thought he might leave. Instead, he poured himself coffee and sat across from me. Most people are too afraid to ask questions. I am beginning to think fear is not always useful. A faint smile touched his face before disappearing again. And what exactly were you thinking about? I hesitated. Then I decided honesty was easier. You look different in those photographs. His gaze drifted toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. I was different. Because of her? Because of life? The answer felt incomplete, but I sensed pushing harder would only make him retreat behind his walls again. We sat in silence for several seconds. The city buzzed far below us. Traffic moved through the streets like streams of light. Finally Ethan spoke. Victoria believed everyone deserved a second chance. The statement caught me off guard. And you disagreed? Usually. There was something unexpectedly vulnerable in the admission. She spent years convincing me the world was not as simple as I thought. I studied him carefully. This version of Ethan felt unfamiliar. Softer. Less guarded. Did she succeed? His eyes met mine. Some days. A strange warmth settled between us. Not romance. Not yet. Just understanding. For the first time since the wedding, we were having a conversation that felt real. Then his phone rang. The moment shattered instantly. Ethan glanced at the screen. Whatever he saw caused his expression to harden. The walls returned. The distance returned. He stood without answering the call. "I have meetings today." I frowned. That was a quick change of subject. Some subjects are easier than others. Before leaving, he stopped beside the island. "Claire." "What?" "Do not spend your entire day hiding in the penthouse." I blinked. "Are you giving me permission to leave?" "You do not need permission." The answer surprised me. "Then why did you make rules?" Ethan considered the question for several seconds. "Because there is a difference between freedom and isolation." I stared at him, uncertain what he meant. He picked up his jacket. "The driver will take you anywhere you want to go." Then he left. Hours later, I stood alone beside the window, watching his car disappear into the Manhattan traffic below. My eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the room that remained frozen in time. For the first time, I realized something important. Victoria was not the reason Ethan felt distant. She was the reason he still remembered how to care. And somehow, that realization made him far more dangerous to my heart than his reputation ever could. 3 days later, I finally left the penthouse alone. Well, not completely alone. Ethan's driver waited downstairs beside a black sedan polished so perfectly it reflected the entire skyline. But for the first time since the wedding, I felt something resembling freedom. I spent the afternoon walking through a small bookstore near Bryant Park, losing myself among shelves crowded with stories and possibilities. It felt normal, comforting. For a few hours, I could almost pretend my life had not changed overnight. The illusion lasted until I returned home. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, and the moment I stepped inside, I sensed something was wrong. The air felt heavier, quieter. Margaret stood near the kitchen island, her posture unusually tense. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said softly, "your father called several times." My stomach tightened. "Is everything okay?" "I believe so." "He asked you to call him immediately." I grabbed my phone and dialed before she finished speaking. My father answered on the second ring. His voice sounded nervous. "Claire." "Dad, what happened?" Silence stretched for a moment. "Someone came by the office today." "What do you mean, someone?" "A man asking questions. About old contracts. Old business records." My pulse quickened. "What kind of questions?" Another pause. The kind I could not answer. Before I could press further, the elevator chimed again. I looked up instinctively. Ethan stepped into the penthouse. One glance at my face was enough. His expression sharpened immediately. "What happened?" I lowered the phone slowly. "My father says someone has been asking about old company records." Ethan went completely still. The reaction lasted only a second, but I noticed it. "Who?" he asked. "He does not know." Ethan's jaw tightened. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and sent several messages. The entire atmosphere changed. Not dramatic. Not frightening. Just focused. Controlled. Like a man suddenly solving a problem nobody else could see. "Ethan." He looked at me. "Tell me what is going on." For several seconds he said nothing. Then he set his phone down and walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. Evening sunlight painted the glass in shades of gold and amber. "There are things about your father's company that you do not know." My heartbeat accelerated. "Then tell me." "Not yet." Frustration flared inside me. "You keep saying that." "Because timing matters. To you, maybe." He turned toward me. His blue eyes looked colder than usual, but not at me. At the situation. At whatever thoughts were moving behind them. "Claire, if I could explain everything right now, I would." "Then why can you not?" The silence that followed felt enormous. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly. "Because some truths change everything once they are spoken." I stared at him. Somewhere deep inside, I knew he was telling the truth. That was the problem. The honesty in his voice frightened me more than a lie ever could. Later that night, sleep refused to come. Around midnight, I wandered into the kitchen for water. As I passed Ethan's office, I noticed the door standing slightly open. Light spilled into the hallway. Voices drifted from inside. I should have kept walking. Instead, I paused. "We finally found the documents," an unfamiliar man said. "The connection is confirmed." My breath caught. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he asked a question that made my entire world tilt beneath me. "And there is no doubt that Claire Bennett's father was involved?" My heart stopped. For a second I thought I had misunderstood what I heard. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too quiet. I stood frozen outside Ethan's office, every instinct telling me to walk away while every emotion pushed me closer. Inside the room, the unfamiliar man answered immediately. "No doubt. The records match. The signatures are authentic." A heavy silence followed. I could almost hear Ethan thinking. Then his voice came lower than before. "And Claire knows nothing?" "From everything we found, no. She was completely unaware." I backed away before I could hear anything else. My pulse thundered in my ears as I hurried down the hallway and into my room. The door clicked shut behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed trying to breathe. My father, Ethan, Victoria. Somehow all of it was connected. I just did not know how. Sleep never came. By sunrise, I had replayed the conversation 100 times. Every possibility felt worse than the last. Around 8 o'clock, a soft knock sounded at my door. "Come in." Ethan entered carrying a cup of coffee, my favorite order. Normally the gesture would have surprised me. Today it only made my chest ache. "You are awake early," he said. I could not sleep. His eyes studied my face carefully. For a moment, I wondered if he knew I had overheard everything. If he did, he gave no sign. He placed the coffee on the table beside me. "There is something we need to discuss." The words instantly tightened every muscle in my body. "About my father?" Ethan's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "So you heard." I looked away. "Enough." He remained silent for several seconds before sitting across from me. Morning light streamed through the windows behind him, outlining his shoulders in gold. For the first time since meeting him, he looked uncertain. "Then ask me what you want to know." I laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Where do I even start?" Ethan folded his hands together, waiting, giving me the choice. "Did you marry me because of my father?" The question hung between us. His answer came immediately. "At first, partly." The honesty hurt more than any lie could have. I looked down at my wedding ring. "So this was all a plan?" "No," his voice sharpened. "It started as an investigation." I slowly lifted my eyes to meet his. "Investigation into what?" Ethan stared out at the skyline before answering. "Years ago, information was leaked from one of my companies. Sensitive information. It created consequences that affected many lives." His jaw tightened. Victoria was one of those people. My chest constricted. "You think my father was responsible?" "I know he was involved." The room fell silent. I wanted to defend my father. I wanted to tell Ethan he was wrong. But deep down, I remembered the fear in my father's voice. The unanswered questions. The secrets he never explained. Then why help him? I whispered. Ethan's eyes met mine. "Because when I finally found the truth, I found you too." My breath caught. What does that mean? For the first time, something completely unguarded appeared in his expression. Not control. Not authority. Just honesty. "It means I expected to find someone I could blame." His voice softened. "Instead, I found someone who had been carrying the consequences of other people's choices her entire life." Neither of us spoke. Outside, New York moved beneath the morning sun. Inside, the distance between us felt different somehow. Smaller. More complicated. Then Ethan stood and walked toward the window. "There is more you need to know," he said quietly. "Much more." He turned back toward me. "But once you learn the full truth about Victoria and your father, nothing will ever be the same again." The truth arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Gray clouds hung low over Manhattan, turning the skyline into a watercolor painting of steel and shadows. I stood beside the window in Ethan's office while a thick folder rested on the desk between us. For nearly an hour, neither of us had touched it. Somehow that folder felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You deserve the truth." His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. Slowly he opened the file. Inside were contracts, emails, financial records, and reports stretching back years. At first, the documents meant nothing to me. Then patterns emerged. My father's signature appeared again and again. So did the names of executives connected to one of Ethan's former companies. Piece by piece, the story came together. Years earlier, several people inside the company had leaked confidential information for money. My father had not created the scheme, but he had helped facilitate transactions without fully understanding the consequences. The decisions triggered investigations, bankruptcies, and legal disasters that rippled through countless lives. Victoria's charitable foundation had been one of the organizations caught in the collapse. Funding disappeared. Projects shut down. Families lost support they depended on. The foundation never fully recovered. I sat down slowly. My legs suddenly felt weak. My father never told me any of this. I know. Ethan remained standing beside the desk. When the investigation started, he cooperated. He was never charged with a crime. But the damage was already done. I stared at the papers. And Victoria? For the first time that afternoon, Ethan looked away. Rain tapped softly against the glass behind him. Victoria dedicated her life to helping people. His voice softened. She spent years trying to rebuild what was lost. I thought of the photographs, the preserved room, the grief that still lingered in every corner. You loved her very much. Ethan nodded once. I did. The honesty hurt and comforted me at the same time. After a long silence, I asked the question that had haunted me for days. Why did you marry me? Ethan looked directly at me. No hesitación. No carefully constructed answer. Just truth. Because I wanted access to information your father might still have. My chest tightened. Then he continued. But that stopped mattering very quickly. I blinked. When? A faint smile appeared. Small. Real. Probably the first time you argued with me. Despite everything, I laughed softly. Ethan stepped closer to the window beside me. Below us, New York moved through the rain without slowing down. Thousands of lives continuing forward. Claire, I spent years carrying anger. His reflection appeared beside mine in the glass. I convinced myself that finding someone to blame would finally give me peace. Did it? I asked quietly. Ethan's eyes met mine in the reflection. No, the answer came immediately. What changed? For several seconds he said nothing. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a small envelope. Victoria wrote this shortly before she died. My breath caught. He handed it to me. Inside was a handwritten note. The final line stood out immediately. Holding on to pain only teaches pain how to stay. I read the sentence twice. 3 times. Then I looked up. Ethan's expression held none of the cold certainty he once wore like armor. I think she understood something I never did, he said. And what was that? Rain streaked down the glass. The city shimmered beyond it. Ethan's gaze never left mine. That some people enter your life to remind you that your future matters more than your past.